One of the most viewed videos on this channel is of a $40 MIDI keyboard called the AKM 320. It was my entry point into the world of MIDI devices, and it served its purpose, but 3 years later I've grown a little bit distasteful with it. Sure, it's cheap, but it's lacking a lot of features, and I still don't think that it's the most value-oriented MIDI keyboard that you can buy. Thus, today we'll be checking out the Alesis V25, a MIDI keyboard that targets a healthy sweet spot in terms of price for what you get. Let's take a look. Welcome to Top Spec, your one-stop shop for tech content. Today we're obviously going to be talking about the V25, but before we can jump into the technical features, let me first explain why you should care about this MIDI keyboard when there's literally thousands of them on the market. As the name implies, the Alesis V25 features 25 full-size velocity-sensitive keys. This is perhaps the most attractive feature in comparison with other MIDI keyboards on the market, namely the Akai MPK Mini, which you've likely seen all over YouTube. However, even though that keyboard is pretty popular, there were a few reasons why I didn't buy it that you may want to hear. Obviously, these two keyboards have different form factors, both will still easily fit on your desk, you just might not be able to fit the V25 in your average backpack. All that being said, portability was a worthy sacrifice to me, knowing that my muscle memory from playing on a normal piano would translate directly over to the V25 versus having to deal with smaller sized keys. If that's not enough of a selling point to you though, the thing that made me really steer away from the Akai was its overall build quality and construction. Now, I've never personally used an MPK Mini, but from the research I've done, I found out that all of its keys are essentially just attached to several large pieces of plastic. This means that they don't individually actuate, the plastic just bends whenever you push down a key, which in turn means that they're more likely to break. Long story short, if you don't believe me, just Google Akai MPK Mini keys broken off and you'll see what I'm talking about. The V25's mechanism, on the other hand, is much more commonplace and what you'd expect from an average keyboard. Each key individually actuates, and springs are featured in the design to give them a little bit of resistance. Just keep in mind that the B-roll photos that you're seeing right now are not actually from the V25, they're from the V49 because that's all I could find online, but the inner mechanisms are identical. The V49 just has 24 more keys. Anyways, that's all the time that I'll devote in this video to hyping up this MIDI keyboard in terms of its competitor products. Let's jump into the technical portion of this review. Aside from the keys, the V25 also has 8 velocity-sensitive drum pads. Now, I'm not personally the type of person that makes heavy use of drum pads in my day-to-day workflow, but I've used them on several occasions and I think that they're pretty good. The only criticisms that I can give them is that they require a noticeable amount of force in order to activate the higher velocities, and there have been situations where they falsely registered 2 inputs when there should have only been 1. In researching for this video, I actually found out that Alesis rolled out a firmware update to address that misinput issue, and since that, everything's worked fine. So I guess the only real criticism that I can give the drum pads is about their sensitivity, which you can tweak with software, but since I'm not a heavy user of them, I haven't messed around with that. Beyond the drum pads, you have an array of other controls, including a pitch slider, a mod wheel, 4 programmable buttons, 4 programmable knobs, and most importantly, octave up and down keys. After all, this is only a 25 key piano, so octave keys are necessary in order to play the full range of notes. As for the quality of all these controls, everything feels great. The buttons are very clicky, the pitch slider has a great amount of resistance, and the knobs are perfectly fine. Again, I don't make use of all of these controls in my everyday workflow. I gravitate towards using the octave keys and once in a while, the pitch slider, and I'm sure many of you will be the same way. All of this being said, it's still nice to have access to the mod wheel and programmable buttons whenever that may be necessary, so I don't think any space was wasted here. The last major hardware thing that I want to talk about are the keys. The V25's keys are semi-weighted, which means that when you press down on them, they push back a little bit just like a real piano, which obviously has to activate a mechanism. They don't have the most resistance in the world, certainly not as much as a real acoustic piano, but it's enough to satisfy me. Overall, I'd say it's fairly comparable to the Yamaha P45, which is a piano that we've done a review on this channel already. The V25's resistance is a little bit less pronounced than that keyboard, but they're still very similar to me. TLDR, I love weighted keys, and their inclusion on the V25 is a noteworthy feature, especially considering the fact that it is within the $50 to $150 price range. All this being said, if you're used to playing on a digital piano that has no resistance whatsoever, it may take a little bit of adjustment to get used to the V25's weighted keys, but I think that resistance is all worth it. Anyways, that's all I really have to say about the keys. They're really amazing for the price, and even if this MIDI keyboard was stripped of all features and only had the 25 keys, I could still consider buying it. One note I'd like to add is that the V25's price has risen since I originally bought it, perhaps due to the COVID-19 pandemic or something else. Don't worry, I am keeping that in mind with all of the commentary and criticisms I provide in this video. I got it for under $90, but even if it were $150, I would still highly consider getting it. Moving on, the way that you connect this MIDI keyboard to your computer is like any other MIDI keyboard. Use a MIDI to USB cable, aka the old printer cables that you probably have lying around in your house. Honestly speaking, I don't know if the cable that you're seeing in this video is the one that originally came in the box, because I literally have 10 of these in my drawer, but I do recall that the original cable worked fine and looked somewhat similar to this. Beyond plugging it in, it should be automatically recognized by your DAW, but for some reason it didn't for me, so I had to go in and manually enable it. If you have FL Studio 2, you may have to do this as well. Just hit Options, MIDI Settings, click V25, and hit Enable. Things should be good to go from there. Overall though, I'd like to keep this video as concise as possible. When you buy the V25, you get what you pay for. 25 velocity sensitive keys, 8 decent drum pads, and a whole host of programmable knobs and buttons. I use it every single day in my workflow when I'm making beats or just songwriting in general, and I could easily recommend it to people just starting out in music production and professionals alike. Oh, and if you decide to buy the keyboard, be sure to use our Amazon affiliate link down in the description so we get a little bit of kickback. We're still a small channel, so we can use every penny that we get to improve the quality of these videos. That's it for today though. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos. I've already done several reviews on products that might appeal to you if you're into music production, so be sure to check those out. But as always, I'm Aaron, this is Top Spec, and we'll see you next week.